I have a right, even as a white woman, to get involved in this practice that they all stand against. I've met about 3,000 women over my probably 13-year journey in working in FGM, and every single one of those 3,000 women says they wished it had not happened to them. And I always say, even though I'm white, if I cut my arm and the blood comes out, it's the same colour. And actually, I feel called, I feel we are all called to stop this harm in our country and elsewhere. So that's sort of my raison d'etre, really. So who am I? Who on earth is it sitting in front of you? Well, I suppose I sit with two hats on. And I feel that this piece of biblical context out of Jeremiah really does inspire me. For before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. I'm a misfit in my family. I don't know if anybody else here is a misfit, but I'm a one-off. None of my family have done anything like this before. But God chooses who he wants to use. I think it's even more miraculous that he chose me, because if I have a background in human resources, and if I was God's HR manager, I sure as heck wouldn't choose me for the job. A white woman, I wasn't even a medic, and I've been chosen to end a cultural practice that's principally a black-on-black practice in Africa, but of course comes to the diaspora from where people come and carries on in the UK and elsewhere. So I worked in aid work from 2001. My background was HR in the city. Then I did psychology, retrained in that, and then I volunteered for a Christian charity called Medair, who works in war zones and natural disasters. So I worked in northern Uganda, North Sudan, South Sudan, and ended up in West Darfur, sort of via Kenya and a few other places. And it was in West Darfur I met a little girl who'd had FGM. And it was then that my life sort of changed directions, really. But I will have probably had, I think I've worked in 14 countries in Africa over the last decade or so. So most of my time has been over there. So who is 28 Too Many? Well, we are principally a research charity. When I started thinking about what I could do, and after that little story Nadine just shared with us as to how we got some funding, I'd met this little girl. She'd had FGM at 5, so she was cut and sewn up. She was raped at 10. This is probably the worst bit of my talk, so after you've got through this, it's all fine from here on in. It's just any of you that feel a bit anxious, what on earth am I going to say? She was raped at 10, all her village was killed, her family was killed. She was left for dead, but she was actually pregnant from the rape. We found her at 7 months pregnant and gave her a safe delivery. And because of that, she survived, as did her child. So I met her, there she was with her child at 11 years old, and it's like, how can this be right? How can this even happen? And I said to God, who's going to speak up for girls like this? And I heard the audible voice of God going, you will. Really? It's the only time I have heard God speak. But it's like, why would I get involved? How on earth could I went back to my home church, who was here last week. I didn't say this in front of my church when they were here last week, but actually they kind of said, it's okay, I found what I'm called to do. I'm called to do ending FGM across the world. Been going on 2,000 world, but never mind, mostly Islamic context, but and they went, oh no, you're not. It's like, yes, I am. So it was then a case of a 7-year apprenticeship with my church while they put me through their mission board and eventually agreed it was a calling, but I think they were somewhat anxious that I would actually end up in a body bag somewhere in Western Sudan, really, if I'm honest about it. So they thought that was rather inconvenient for them, and a poor risk management, in all fairness to them. So but eventually they and I agreed that it was going to happen anyway, so we got on with it together. So 28 Too Many is a research charity. Some people say, why do you do research? We do research because nobody else does. There's no money in research, even when the government gave 36 million a few years ago to do end FGM work through the Department for International Development. It's not given to a charity like us who does research. It's put into Africa, and we'd like to think it makes some contribution for good. We actually think research is good because you then help squeeze the problem from the top down and the bottom up. So you influence the influencers. So they're the UN, we're the UN rep on ending harmful traditional practices for the UK. We work with them. I'll go out to New York probably next year to the Commission on the Status of Women again. I went in 2012 to make sure that FGM got into the mandate and got into the Sustainable Development Goals. These are how you use you actually make advocacy work. You have to know what you're doing, and if you are trustworthy and objective and do useful research, people trust you and then they use your opinions. I have no angle on this. It's not a practice that affects me and my people group, and I think that means that we can actually work with people groups to help them use our work to end with their countries. So we also use our work to advocate with governments, national governments all across the 28 countries. It's called 28 Too Many because it's the 28 countries in Africa that practice FGM. Somalia and Sudan are the two countries we're doing at the moment, and both of them are double country reports because you've got Sudan and South Sudan, and you've got Somalia and Somaliland, but they're sort of double countries really. But it's really the 28 countries, and we also work across the diaspora, so that's all of Europe, Australia, a little bit of Indonesia, a little bit of the Bora people group in India, Pakistan, a little bit of Colombia. But principally, it's a practice that started in Africa, and our view was if you ended it in Africa, it would almost be outlawed. In terms of statistics, so what we do with our research, we use it for lobbying and advocacy both in the upper and lower house in the UK and let other people do elsewhere. And we also use it with advocating for people like midwife groups or the police. The Met Police we're training in a couple of weeks' time, and border controls from across in the US. So we help them make things work in their country.